Welcome to Learning with UNP. In this session of Python for Data Science, we are going to understand about local and global variables. That includes introduction to local variables, examples of local variables, introduction to global variables, and finally, examples of global variables. Let's begin with understanding about local variables. Local variables are defined inside a function and can only be used within that function. They are not accessible outside the function in which they are defined. Local variables are said to be defined within a local scope. Here is a syntax of local variable. Def function name, local variable, include the code to be executed, and return the result. This code defines a function called function name that declares a local variable, performs operation using that variable, and returns a result. Now, let's look at the pseudocode representation of it. Step 1. Define a function. Means define a function by creating a named block of code. Step 2. Declare a variable inside the function. Local variable. Means inside the function, declare a variable that exists only within it. Step 3. Use the local variable within the function. Means this variable can be used only within the function. Step 4. Return or use the result within the function. Means returns a result from the function, often involving this variable. Step 5. The local variable is not accessible outside the function. Means after the function ends, the variable is not accessible outside the function. Here are the examples demonstrating local variables. In the first example, we define a function named addNumbers using def addNumbers. Inside the function, we create a local variable localSum, which stores the result of adding 5 and 3. We use return statement to send the value stored in localSum back when the function is called. When we call add numbers, it calculates 5 and 3, and the print statement prints the output. Let's execute this and check. Finally, the sum of 5 and 3, that is 8, is printed. Let's move on to the second example. In the second example, we start by defining a function called calculate area, which takes one parameter as radius. This function is like a mini program that calculates the area of a circle. Inside the function, we create a variable named pi and assign it the value 3.14159. This pi variable is only available within calculate area function. It's like a temporary workspace specifically for this function. We use the formula of area to calculate the area of a circle. Here, pi represents the mathematical constant and radius is the parameter provided when the function is called. After calculating the area, here we use the return statement to send the result back to whoever called the function. This result is stored in a variable named area. Now, when we calculate the area of 25, we are telling the function to calculate the area of a circle with the radius 25. The function computes the area using the provided radius and returns the result. The print statement prints the output. Let's execute this and check. The output, that is area of a circle with radius 25, is 1963.493, so on and so forth. Now let's look at the global variables. Global variables are defined outside any function and can be accessed throughout the entire script, including within the functions. A global variable in Python is often declared as the top of the program. We can access a global variable from any part of the program. Here is a syntax of it. Global variable equals to value, def function name, include the code block, return the result. This code declares a global variable glob_var with a value, then defines a function named function name that uses this global variable in its code block and returns a result. Now let's look at the pseudocode representation of global variable. Step 1. Declare a variable outside any function. Global variable means create a variable outside of any function, making it accessible throughout the program. Step 2. Define a function means Create a named block of code with a specific task. Step 3. Use the global variable within the function. Means inside the function, access and use the global variable declared outside the function. Step 4. Return or use the result within the function. Means perform operations or calculations using the global variable and return a result, or use it for any other purpose within the function. Step 5. The global variable is accessible both inside and outside functions. Means after the function is defined, the global variable can be accessed and modified from both inside and outside of functions throughout the program. Here are examples demonstrating global variables. In the first example, we declare a variable named global sum outside the function, making it a global variable accessible throughout the program. We define a function named add numbers to add two numbers a and b. Inside add numbers, we declare the global keyword to indicate that we want to use the global variable global sum within the function. We calculate sum of a and b, assign it to global sum, and return the value. Whenever we call add numbers of 5, 3, it calculates 5 plus 3, assigns the result to global sum, and returns the output. We print both the returned value and the updated value of global sum, which is 8. Let's execute this and check. The output of 5 plus 3 is 8, and the global sum output is also 8. Now let's look at the second example. In the second example, we declare a global variable named counter outside the function, making it accessible throughout the program. We define a function called increment counter, which increments the value of a counter. Inside the increment counter function, we declare the global keyword to indicate that we want to modify the global variable counter within this function. We increase the value of counter by 1 each time the function is called. This function call increments the value of counter by 1. Increment counter and print counter. These two lines are there to increment the counter by 1 and print its updated value for a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 times. Let's execute this and check. From 0 it is incremented to 1. From 1 it is incremented to 2. From 2 it is incremented to 3. From 3 it is incremented to 4. From 4 it is incremented to 5. The same is explained here. Now let's use the same example with counter as a local variable. We define a function called increment counter, which increments the value of counter. Inside the function, we declare a local variable named counter and initialize it to 0. We then increment the value of counter by 1. Finally, we use the return statement to send back the updated value of a counter. What is happening here is, since the counter is initialized to 0, each time the function is called, it will always return the value 1. This happens because the value of counter is 0 at the beginning of each function call and then immediately incremented by 1. As a result, the function doesn't effectively maintain a count, it's just always the 1. Let's execute this and check. As we discussed, the same is happening here and the output is 1 every time. The same is explained here too. Now let's use the same example with counter as global and local variables. We start with a global variable counter initialized to 0. Inside the increment counter function, a local variable counter is declared and initialized to 0. Then we increment this local counter variable by 1. Finally, we return the value of local counter variable. Print increment counter. This line calls the increment counter function, which initializes a local variable counter to 0, increments it by 1, and then returns the value of this local counter, which is 1. Let's execute this and check. Hence, it printed 1. Now, this line of print increment counter also calls the increment counter function, which resets the local variable counter to 0, increments by 1, and returns 1. Let's execute this and check. So it also prints 1. Here we have print of counter line. What this does is, this prints the global variable counter, which is still 0 because The function increment counter does not modify the global variable. Let's execute this and check. And the same with this print of counter code 2. Here we have increment counter and then counter. What this part of code does is this call to the function increments the local variable counter to 1, but it doesn't return anything or print any value. Counter. This line is not a print statement. It doesn't output anything. However, it evaluates the expression counter, which is still the global variable, and remains 0. Let's check whether the output is 0 or not and execute it. As we discussed, the output is 0. So after executing all these lines, counter remains 0 as the global variable, and the function increment counter increments a local variable counter to 1 but doesn't affect the global variable. The same is explained here again. This is all about today's lecture. See you in the next lecture. Thank you.